Now we'll move to item 12E on the agenda, which is a public safety sales tax update. And we have in front of us Chief of Police Cole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm so glad we were able to carve out some time from those others to give me additional time up here. I know you're yearning for a long presentation. So what I have before you tonight is a largely rehash of presentations that we provided in the past, just from an update perspective. But I think it's important to go back a little bit. S, you mind going to the next slide? So at the end of last year, this body came together and recognized the need for this public safety sales tax in order to provide some sustainability for a lot of the work we're doing. We had, besides the public safety sales tax, we also had the grant available to us to the tune of about $100 million spread amongst the 300 law enforcement agencies in the state. And if you met the requirements of the public safety sales tax, you were also meeting the requirements of the grant. At the time when we first brought this forward to council, our reading of the law and our understanding of the grant as detailed in the law really showed this to be something that was pretty limiting, and so we had no intention of going after that. Our interest was in the public safety sales tax, which was ongoing, sustainable, and not something that would require some additional hoops to jump through. S, you mind go on the next slide? So just to go over it again, the grant is Criminal Justice Training Commission administered. It's $100 million. It expires in June of 2028, meaning you have access to the fund. So when my group came before you a couple weeks ago to discuss this and bring forward our grant award, all we're doing is really earmarking that money. They have not deposited any money into an account for us. We have access to it until June of 2028. If we don't use it, it goes away. So we can use it for hiring and training of new officers and co-responders. In the law, they said it was going to cover 75% of salary. They were going to require a local match, a max of $125,000 of funding per position, which turned out not to be the case as we went along, which will explain a little bit of how we kind of evolved through this process. Policy and training requirements to attain the grant, which we were already going through that process for the sales tax. And then, and again, we were already levying or receiving one of the 3 available public safety sales tax in order for us to even go after the public safety sales tax. So we were in a good spot to apply for this grant, but we just saw it as not really being worth the squeeze for the limited amount of juice that would come out of it, given the position that we were in. Next slide. So again, the broad use for the sales tax, very, very broad. You can see up here, this is a slide that I've shown this body before last year and again earlier this year. Everything from domestic violence services, public defenders, diversion programs, reentry work for inmates, reducing homelessness, community placements for juvenile offenders, community outreach, alternative response, mental health crisis response. That was for the sales tax. The grant had a much narrower scope for which it could be used. Do you mind going to the next slide? So these were all the requirements that we had to go through. And again, I appreciate council early in November expressing a desire to move forward with this and frankly moving into December, because this required a lot of work on the part of our staff to get here, and we were one of the first agencies across the finish line. Something I'm very proud of our staff for making that happen. This is work they were doing while continuing their other daily work. They were carving out the time, and very, very proud of what they did. So next slide. And again, these are more of the requirements that came up, and you guys are aware of this, but it's public safety sales tax. Leadership requirements, checking on the chief to make sure he is CJTC certified, the volunteer requirements, staffing plans, 911 and case closure rates, all these things we've complied with. And next slide. So come to mid-March of this year, and we see an article as we're trying to get our first bit of proofs across in June. We have a deadline we have to hit. So you do your initial submission to CJTC to show that we're trying to come into compliance. They then kick back to us feedback of areas where we're falling short and where we need to improve. In that process, it's very iterative. We're going through this with our unions. We're going through our policies. They're looking at the policies with a fine-tooth comb, and CJTC is saying, hey, you need to change this language here, which required us to go back into a negotiation or bargaining stance with the union. Very time-intensive, very labor-intensive. So we're doing this work, and all along the time, we're not thinking anything about the grant until we see an article where Kent and Black Diamond have signaled that they are applying for this grant. They're using it to hire 20 officers. We were surprised by that. It was one-time funding, and they also were applying for near $1 million more in some other technology. So we made a call down to Kent and said, what are you guys doing? We're trying to understand this. Because, I mean, the word had really been this grant was going to be very, very labor-intensive, very, very narrow in its scope, and really of limited utility. And so they had a situation where they know they have a retirement cliff coming. They have 20 officers that are about to retire, and they're an over 200-person department, 200-officer department. So they end up saying, hey, we know by June of 2028 we're going to need to hire people. And if we can soften that blow and we can surge and hire, we know that we have people that have declared that they're going to be retiring by June of 2028. So it made sense. Well, they started bringing up other things that they're using it for. And they said, hey, we're using it for backfill of overtime when we have to complete all these mandated trainings. They also mentioned that they were purchasing radars for their jail cells. So they have a jail similar to us, one of the few municipalities that does. And this technology really monitors the vitals of individuals who are in there. And we were like, wow, what a great opportunity. It's risk mitigation. It provides us with an opportunity to bring this technology into every cell. And so at that point, we submitted for a grant of about $1.4 million. Other things we looked at was bicycles to the tune of about $18,000. This is really for our special services unit, which right now we have officers working on overtime, which is being funded by Sound Transit to backfill that overtime use to provide patrol services down to our light rail station. It's been a great success. Sound Transit's been very happy with the program and what we're doing. We're really at a spot is as we get closer to being a higher up, we can fund nearly 2 police officer positions once we get the necessary staffing in place. And so having the bicycles, we view that as as our downtown core builds out, as Sound Transit continues to become even more of a hub. Those bicycles are a great vehicle for our staff to be able to get around and interact with the community. So a great opportunity there. The crisis intervention training was the tune of about $150,000. This is mandated training that we have to go through. And when we do that, again, as we talk about, we don't have a deep bench. We have what we have that's deployed, and when we have to pull officers off to go through this mandated training, we have to pay other people to work overtime to backfill their positions. So this $150,000 allows us to complete this mandated training, and so we were very excited about this opportunity. And drone is a first responder. So this is another thing you've seen. Everett started to bring this on board. If you pay attention at all, if you're on LinkedIn or any social media, you've seen Redmond. They just recently caught a robbery suspect through the use of their drone. It's a budget helicopter. This is a response tool. It's a tool that doesn't stay up in the air very long, but it is able to deploy right away. We currently have drones, but they're in the back of a car where we have to pull them out. We have to assemble them. It takes a couple minutes, and we deploy them, and we were looking at them through a little screen. So this allows us to have an ability to have an officer deploy this thing remotely through what's called beyond visual line of sight, so that they can be overhead within 30 seconds to a minute compared to our response time of 2.5, 3 minutes, so they can provide decision-making quality information. So our responding officers can now start to make an appropriately tailored response to what they need to do to catch a person or to understand or assess is an officer even needed at the scene. So Redmond so far has seen, I want to say about 10 to 15% decrease in the number of calls that require an officer to respond directly there. Now, you still have officers responding remotely via this drone, but they're able to get on scene and determine that there's no need for an officer. It's also used in fire service. It's used to support their work. If we have a reported residential fire, if we have a vehicle collision, this can deploy out and not only let our responding officers what's going on, but this is a signal that we could share with the fire department to let them know what's happening. Another exciting thing about DFR is it has the ability to deploy an AED. It has the ability to carry an AED out to a scene. So again, you start talking about 30 seconds to a minute. We get that 911 call. Our officer can deploy this, fly it over to the house, drop this AED down. It can be used by somebody who's in crisis or can help the person who's having this health crisis. Also is able to deploy naloxone. So it has different payloads that can be carried on it. So we're very excited about the potential of this technology. It's fairly nascent. But as we see Redmond, we see Renton, Bellevue is preparing to bring it online in the not too distant future. We view this as a technology that allows us to, in a city of our size, to really address some of the more complex needs that we have. Next slide. So the other thing that we looked at was a services of a LEMAP. So our jail, our goal when we hired our jail manager was to attain accreditation. So what a LEMAP is this allows WASPIC, which is the governing body for accreditation for jails and police departments, to come in, and they do a pre-assessment. And they really come in and look at everything. They look at your policies, look at your practices, and they give you kind of a guideline of where you're at. They let you know, are you 70% of the way there? Are you 85% of the way there? And they really give you a guidepost that you need to hit. So it's a process that when beginning your accreditation, if you've never engaged in it before, and our jail has not, we feel that we're ready. We're on a strong footing to begin this process. Having them come in first to let us know so there's no surprises, it's a great opportunity. But again, we're using the grant to fund this. Staffing, and I know this has been a friction point, and I believe Deputy Chief Steichen talked a little bit about this, but we had the social worker and the staffing of a corrections officer. So bringing us up to that 28. We asked for 28 in the past. We recognized it wasn't going to happen. And having that 28th corrections officer to help facilitate so much of the programming that needs to happen is where we get to our sustainability levels. And so we are seeing again and again that we have community partners that are ready to come in. We have some really neat programming opportunities. But if we don't have the staff there to facilitate that, as they're taking care of the day-to-day, having somebody that can hang out outside the classroom or can hang out, they don't have to be right over the shoulder, but they have to be within earshot. So if there is a safety situation, they can be there to help the volunteers or the other community groups that are coming in to work with our folks. And they work with our medical staff right now, and so it's a similar sort of setup where they provide the privacy, but they're within earshot if something were to happen. The social worker, our current community our community support specialist has been doing phenomenal work in getting people housed while they're stable and in our jail facility. We are having, later on this week, we have a federal representative coming to visit our jail, and one of the things we'll be highlighting is the work of our social worker, of our community support specialist. This eclipses anything that we are ever doing on the road. When I worked in our co-response, our community outreach program, the success rate is very difficult. When people are in the throes of addiction, when they have the pangs and they are in a spot where they're just really in a survival mindset, having the conversation of, are you ready to receive help? Are you ready to receive housing? Are you ready to begin that journey? It's a very difficult question for people to answer in the moment. What we find is sometimes when they're in jail, when they've had a moment to detox, when they've had a couple days, and they now have a compassionate human being sitting across from them with good training who can start asking some of these questions and can offer an array of choices right then and there, real choices. So when they walk out the door, it's not just an empty promise of, hey, follow this pamphlet or follow this or call this number, only to find out the number doesn't work. It's somebody waiting for them on the outside. It's that warm handoff of getting them connected with resources, getting them directly to housing, getting them into a treatment facility. So our limitation right now with our social worker, who has an ability to work somewhat autonomously, is she's only one person. And so we believe that funding this for 2 years puts us in a spot to really assess whether we want to make a stronger or longer-term commitment. I'm very confident. I look at WASPIC. I sit on the executive board for WASPIC, and one of the grants we have that's a perennial grant is a co-response grant. I feel very confident that this grant would be something that where we could possibly seek sustainable funding in the future. If not, and we have difficult decisions to make, we'll make those difficult decisions. But what I know is I've got money right now that's being offered where we have an opportunity to move forward on this. So we'll do a straight-faced approach and looking at this, and we'll assess it. And if it isn't in the best interest to keep the position funded, we will move away from that. But we think that there are many avenues that we can look at, including through our partners at Verdant, where we're going to have some pretty compelling data because we have the data now, and what we're doing is something I'm really excited about, which is the only reason that we have these two positions on here because I was reluctant to put anything else on there. So after we had this happen, we submitted our grant in March 31st, and then if you want to go to the next slide. And this is just some of the dates, the timelines that we had as we went along. So kind of went through there, and again, council, we began the clock in December 7th of 2025 with our intent that we were applying December 9th, CJTC acknowledged application. On the 13th, we submitted our sales tax to the Department of Revenue. The 21st, we completed their partial review, or they completed their partial review. On the 28th, they completed the review of the initial application. Then we did our second submission on March 13th, and this is about that time when we're trying to get get things in order and get as close as we can because we have to hit the deadline by June 5th in order to avoid any sort of penalty on the sales tax revenue, because we knew that's a real thing. This was a bit of an existential issue. As we hit that April time, that's where March, we learned of Kent and their application. So we did our initial grant application for the 1.4, and then things went dark. We continued to have conversations with CJTC because, again, this iterative process, we were on the phone with them a couple times a week, and Commander Dilworth learned in May of 2026 that CJTC said, hey, we have more funding earmarked for you. You put in for the 1.4, but we have more funding available to you. And so at that point, we went back to the drawing board. But these were things that were happening quick because these were conversations that came up where it's like, you got to get this in. And so the mad dash began. And at that point, I have it written down here, our second round of asks included things like more training equipment. We have simunition, which are paintball guns that we use for our officers that are modeled after their real firearms. And while the deployment of firearms is exceedingly rare, we have to make sure they're doing it appropriately. So this allows us with these paintball guns to replicate or create real-world situations where we expect them to react appropriately. And most of the times, 99% of the time, that involves not engaging the person with lethal force. But if you don't put them into these stressful situations, you can't really replicate and expect them to be successful in those real-world situations. So this equipment is very expensive, and it's always one of those things where we've either tried to borrow from people or we've cobbled together the equipment that we've now had for over 20 years. It's failing, and so this was an opportunity to use a grant. This is the sort of thing where my staff comes forward in the budget and they submit and say, hey, we need new ammunition gear or new training gear. I'm like, look for a grant. Well, here comes a grant. We look for more DFR equipment. So we realized that beyond the helicopter, the mini helicopter, we needed to get a whole console set up, and there was also additional training that was needed. The radar line, so they have double heads, the vendor that we've been looking at. So the radar units for the jail cells, they are in our cells that have double occupancy bunks, we've realized that if you have two people in there, they've said, hey, we're not going to be able to address that. So what we'd be doing is putting a single head, but if we had one person who is in a medical crisis, the system might not detect it. Well, they're coming out with double head technology, and that requires another line that we have to add in, so we asked for additional money for that as they're working on this technology. The Pharaoh, we asked for additional training for our staff for the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was used just the other day on the fatality collision that happened at 200th. It's used for crime scenes. It's also used for collision scenes by our crime scene investigators as well as our our traffic reconstructionists. And this technology is it's a laser reproduction, 3D, 2-scale reproduction of a crime scene as it is. The 3D rendering is very powerful. It is very data intensive. So learning how to use this piece of equipment is very important, making sure they have proper training so this can be admissible in court. But also, we have to have a place to store it. So we actually had to buy a tower, especially just a large computer where we could store this immense amount of data. And so that was a very expensive piece of equipment that, again, would have been something we would have deferred on. We also look for health screenings for our staff. And I'm not sure if Deputy Chief Steichen talked about this, but every year, it's called LEOCA, the Law Enforcement's Killed in Action or Line of Duty. They release data. And we've known for some time now that one of the leading causes of deaths for law enforcement officers is cardiac related. And there is a company out there called Sigma Tactical that will come and they will provide full screenings for your staff, stress tests, where they come to your station with doctors and they set up for a week. And so we're trying to remove the barriers for a lot of our staff, and we're, again, providing the funding. So we had a separate grant that we applied for through the state, which funded about 20 police officers to go through this training. Well, now we can put the rest of our staff through here. So when Sigma Tactical comes out later, it's probably going to be early 2027, we'll be able to provide these heart screenings for our staff. And I had a very dear friend of mine who had a cardiac event and ended up passing away at an untimely, a very young age. And so one of our officers who worked here, Mark Brinkman. And so this is something that's near and dear to my heart. It's very impactful, and it's a bit of a great opportunity to use some training to make sure we're taking care of some grant funding to make sure we're taking care of our staff. This one I get teased by my staff, but looking at a Comfort Canine. I had a chance to go to International Association of Chiefs of Police conference in Boston a couple years ago now, And the training, I went to a class on comfort canines and what it can do to break down barriers. So it's not only something that can provide comfort for our staff, it's something that can provide comfort to victims of crimes, to people who have witnessed other traumatic events, people that maybe have a fear of the police. It's a great icebreaker. And some of the work that's been done by some of the East Coast agencies, and it's really starting to spread across the whole country, is pretty darn neat in building and strengthening relationships with the community. This is something where, again, that we're talking about a highly social animal. It's not trained up to a level of being a certified therapy dog, but it is a certified comfort dog. So highly tolerant of people touching it, tugging on its ears, being around large groups of people, and just a very. I'm excited about the potential of this of what this can be. So this is something I asked for as we were going through the grant application. And then there's also OT for the drone as first responder. Again, we are not swimming in staff right now. And so to ask an officer to sit at a computer terminal, there's a recognition that that is taking an officer off the road. That is one reason why we underdeploy our drones right now, because typically when our officers respond to a critical incident, or to really even a domestic violence call where we have someone fleeing from the scene, we have officers who have to go in and actually attend to the victim, make sure they're okay, make sure the scene is safe. We have other people that have to set up containment to look for the suspect after they fled on foot. We have another officer that's starting to look for where the person might have other contacts in the area. So they're kind of doing an intel assessment to go, okay, where could this person run if they are running somewhere? Is there a friend that they're going to call? What kind of car does that friend drive? So we're talking to victims, trying to figure out where is this person at. We don't have extra hands that could be flying a drone overhead. So it's a frustration of mine. I'm paying staff right now by the CBA to fly these drones, and they're an underutilized piece of equipment. They sit in the back of the car, not from negligence, or neglect, but because they have other busy jobs to do. So here, if we're going to give this DFR a fair shot to see if it's a technology that works for our town, having training or having the funding that would allow us to sit an officer on those days where we don't have optimal staffing. We'll have to determine what that is. But where we don't have optimal staffing, we can pay somebody overtime to be in there through this grant, not using city funds. With that, council, I'll take any questions you might have. I recognize there was some sentiment about, and we actually had a chance to meet with Councilmember Mata offline at the police department just to talk about the process. This was something that was happening in real time. Meanwhile, we're under real pressure to reach and get everything completed by that June 5th date. So we were under real pressure to make this happen. That was the real goalpost. And this grant just kind of, we would get a phone call of, hey, you have more funding. Why don't you try and apply for this? And we go back and use the law for guidance, and what we found is that CJTC actually has pretty broad discretion in what they can use it for. That's not reflected in the law. But they've made some broader acceptance as we've looked at other agencies. I can tell you right now, our experience has prompted Everett's, Snohomish County just submitted for $12 million in funding, a lot of it for their helicopter, for putting in dash cameras in all of their cars. So these are all things that other agencies are starting to get wind of. Hey, this is more than what's written in the law, and so there is actually an ability to bring some stuff forward. So with that, council, I'll take any questions you might have.
All right. Any questions, Council Vice President?
Thank you for the update and filling the gap in for us, Chief. We were surprised. It sounded all good, but last we had heard it was like very specific, and you had to bring the officers from Linwood to be Linwood officers. Yep. My question to you is, I think the biggest concern with any money that we can get is great, especially in a budget deficit. The biggest question, at least for myself and what I heard from others, was a potential financial cliff when the grant ends. And so how do you feel about sustaining this grant after it's due? Are they talking about renewals in the future, or do you guys have internal plans per line item on how we will sustain the grant money so that we don't have a financial cliff?
Great question. That was one of the reasons why we were so reluctant to put any sort of staff in there. Everything else in there has a shelf life. So if the drone is first responder, if we viewed that as indispensable, we would come forward to council. We would look at this as something where we would make a decision to either continue it or discontinue it. And if we had to discontinue it, we would do so. In terms of additional funding, the state's in a pretty tough spot. And so we've asked a little bit around what are the chances of this $100 million being renewed. Not anytime before 2028. Now, it could be brought forward, but there's nothing that we can really plan on. So everything in there is expected to have a shelf life. The only area where we have issue is with that corrections officer. But I believe Deputy Chief Steichen tried to explain, it is rare that we are ever at full staffing. I mean, it's something where we hit it for a minute and then we have people leave. And so what we would do is we would look at that and likely have a vacancy. And if we knew that we were approaching the horizon, we would be able to account for that and just not backfill that 28th position. We would leave it vacant and that other person would be absorbed. So we are, these asks were all made with an intention of them either being one-time asks. What I would say is for the radar funding, the risk mitigation that comes with that, WCIA ended up funding wearables for us to the tune of about $35,000 for, we have wearables right now, we only have 10 of them that could be worn by people when they come in if they're considered to be high risk. For not much more money, we can have our whole jail covered with this huge risk mitigation tool. So there are opportunities for grants, and also when you look at WCIA, because what that would cost in the future, if once our grant funding runs out, so after 2028, would be about $51,000. It's $1,000 per head. We also have the option of turning off some of the heads. So if we decide this technology is not being utilized, or it's turned out not to be as valuable as we think it's going to be, we have an ability to turn it off, and then you're no longer paying for the service. So we'd have a head in there. It just would not be sending a signal anymore. The other thing with with that technology, it's we really feel comfortable that WCIA will come to the table because they've been doing that already on the wearables that we have currently. So, yeah, but we could also reduce the number if we decided we want to reduce it down to 35 and then we had to come forward to council. But we feel very confident that WCIA will be there to help us out with that.
Thank you for those responses. I guess where my brain goes is like, who in their right mind turns away free money? But it's, it's a long-term thing. And so have you guys, the only analogy I can think of is like winning the lottery. Like, oh my God, I have all this money. And I went out and bought a Lamborghini. But I didn't think about, like, I can't actually afford this maintenance once I use all my lottery money.
Right.
And so have you guys made the hard decision now of like, okay, maybe we don't need 2.5, maybe just like 1.5, because we're going to want these. The thing is, we don't have a crystal ball and we don't know where the heck we're going to be financially in 2 years.
Right.
And I would hate for you guys to get all these shiny new toys that are saving lives and then we don't have the money
Sure.
to sustain them, or there's no grants out there.
Right.
And so my only ask is that you guys like really sit down and be like, dude, if we're broke in 2 years, what can we get rid of that's going to be okay? Maybe some bikes, cool. But
Sure.
like life-saving measures, we know that in the city of Linwood, they're valuable because we have lost a life in the jail. And in Everett, they have incidents all the time with people bringing in stuff. So
Yep.
I'm all for all of these things, but we need to be realistic here.
Yep.
And we need to be fiscally responsible on what can we get right now and be able to sustain it and have possible grants. And if there's some nice fancy things that we're going to just have to be like, because it's going to have to come from somewhere eventually, all 2.5 beautiful dollars. And so, that's personally
Sure.
where my whole brain goes with all of this. It's all about the fiscal responsibility and also not giving you guys something that we're going to have to yank from you in a couple of years because we broke,
Right. Right.
So that's all my comments. I don't think I had any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Littleweiler.
Thank you, Chief, for the presentation. And the urgency that you had to go with through the grant application, it was reminding me, the council also had to act urgently to try to move this through. And I know there was some concern on it was being rushed, or could we do more public comment or
Right.
whatever. And, there was real cost associated with any kind of delay where it would have it could push us back a quarter or more, and we didn't have any money to really cover that at the time, and it's only gotten worse. So
Yep.
I just wanted to thank the council members that were part of that, because I think
Yes.
this was really a big lifesaver
Yes.
for the city budget. And there's the joke that, the plural of anecdote is not data, but from my conversations during National Night Out, I was pretty upfront, like, hey, people ask what's going on and what should I know about, and I was pretty upfront. Hey, we raised your taxes. This was one of them. We might have to do that again. Here are the cuts we've made. Here are the costs that we've added to your, to their already stretched budget. But when I went through, hey, here's why we thought this was important. Here's what it's doing. I heard from quite a few people who, again, were anti-flock, and so I don't think it's they're just pro law enforcement,
Right.
across the board. But I think they got it, and they appreciated the investment in the community, and especially areas that were close to the Starbucks or the parks, where I think you're talking with people that were talking about, well, yeah, I've interacted with the police because I was giving eyewitness testimony to the shooting not too long ago. So I just wanted to thank the council for that urgent action, and the whole team that went into this application, and all the police officers having to go through the training and the certification. The bikes, to me, it doesn't excite me just because it's bikes.
Sure.
I'm not sponsored by the big bike industry, but it gets me thinking we're closer to like police walking the beat, kind of just being out there, more approachable, seeing people, and the investment with the radar in the jail. I mean, how appropriate anywhere, but particularly in Linwood. What a phenomenal opportunity that could be for hopefully preventing future accidents or incidents, tragedies really. I did just want to clarify, I don't want to go too long, but just to clarify all the figures and everything that you've talked about, those were all included in the $2.5 million grant rundown that we got a couple weeks ago. You're just kind of expanding on like miscellaneous equipment on that spreadsheet. You're giving some color to that.
I want to provide some context.
So everything was already,
Yes.
Okay. That was really just my main question, just to make sure I had that straight in my head. Thank you.
I just want to echo council leadership, the ability for us to pivot and get our staff started on this work, because it's just putting the hours in, was appreciated. It allows us to be one of the first across the line. We were next after Black Diamond and Kent, and now we're only one of 21 agencies of 300 in the state that have been successfully awarded funding. So that's something to be pretty proud of, top 7%. And so we're pretty happy with that. Thank you.
All right, Council President.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, Chief. It wasn't so bad. It wasn't so long. Let's see if we can drag it out a little bit longer. So one of the reasons we had an agenda item on our docket for a while was just to revisit some of the assumptions we made when we initially passed it to Councilmember Lutweiler and VP Escamilla's point. And so I just wanted to drill down on a couple things. First on the grants, and then I'll kind of pivot to the tax itself.
Yep.
On the list of positions that were up there, there was the note that 25% of the costs related to those positions would have to be PD funded. Where are you pulling those funds from?
So they removed that requirement. That was one of the reasons that caused us to move forward with it. We were not going to do that, but they said they would fully fund. Here, I just want to make sure I'm pulling my notes. Following the submission, CJTC advised it interpret the hiring allocation to be up to $125,000 per year, not per position. And CJTC advised it would cover 100% of the social worker costs and benefits. And they were, again, what was happening around the same time, if you could look back, there were a lot of radio shows where this was a topic of discussion, this $100 million grant. A lot of agencies were coming forward saying, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. We're having to jump through hoops. This isn't funding a police officer position. So I think CJTC was trying to make this more accessible, and that's where they started reaching out to us and going, hey, you've crossed the finish line. You're so close. I mean, we were getting close. It wasn't until June 4th that we kind of got our full blessing from CJTC. But they said, you're really on the right track. Why don't you take advantage of this? And they sweetened the pot quite a bit. But so we are fully funded for that, for the social work position. For the corrections officer position, they are not requiring the pure 25% match. They are going to fund up to $125,000. So they'll give us $125,000, whatever our makeup is, and I have that written down. We can cover that out of Fund 105.
Okay, awesome. And with regard to the items you put on the list, I remember in our Finance Committee meeting when you initially proposed the $1.3 million grant that we had some conversations about what if we could more loosely define what public safety means in this context and come up with more ideas. And so I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on what, if any, like community engagement you performed, whether that was with the Chiefs Advisory Group or any other bodies outside the PD, with what asks you were going to make for this grant.
Yes, we went through this with the Chiefs Advisory Group, but again, this was time compressed, so there wasn't a whole lot of outreach that was taking place, and we really kept this looking at equipment, and this was, again, flying as we're going, where they're reaching out to us and saying, hey, hiring, have you thought about hiring? We're like, we really want to be careful with that because this is one-time funds. They're like, well, remember, we can cover training. And so we said, okay. So all of a sudden you have a $140,000 grab right there just for patrol tactics training, which is a training that's required every 3 years for staff. So really what we looked at were, except for the drone as first responder, which again, we're not asking for a drone as first responder program today. We're not coming forward to council with that. We just want to have the money earmarked. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to figure out this makes sense for Linwood, but the opportunity came where we had to grab on and have the money earmarked for us if we wanted to have access to it over the next 2 years. So that was really the thing here that was kind of pushing some of this forward. The bicycles, same thing. We don't have bicycle officers ready to ride the bicycles, but we recognize that we hope to, within the next year, have our staffing levels up to a point where we can now fund these with the Sound Transit, maybe end our overtime detail, and now have just an assigned unit that's working down there, 7 days a week. But that required, again, having to kind of make these plans and forecast out. But we want to be careful about that. And again, back to Council Vice President's point, we want to make sure we weren't putting ourselves in a spot where we were now in an unsustainable stance and exposing ourselves. But the outreach was really to Chiefs Advisory Group, which Councilmember Partial sits on that.
Well, I'll just ask Councilmember Partial, as our liaison, do you feel like you were able to get the information you needed and provide any input?
I believe I described before, this is my third time going through this presentation. I feel well steeped in this presentation by now. And Chief was making light of his ability to be loquacious earlier, and we did do a full, I think it was a good 3 hours we put in on the grant list the first time. And my funny story about the grant is line by line, Chief was going through us on all the items, and then he left off the very last one, and I actually made him go back and do the last line item because I was like, I have sat here for 3 full hours. I am getting that last line item. I'm not going to leave this meeting and say we skipped one line item. So I think the level of detail that the advisory committee got from the police department was fantastic. I really appreciate it. I just wish there was a little more lead time between that meeting and when DC Steichen came to present for us, because I didn't get my opportunity to relate back to the council what was going on with the Chiefs Advisory Committee. So the amount of information we've gotten very, very thorough on the outreach, both to me and to the members of the public that are on that committee. I think the outreach has been fantastic.
To the point of why Deputy Chief Steichen, I was on a planned vacation at that time and could not be here. CJTC sent us a letter saying you've got 2 weeks to get this signed by your mayor. We recognized because of the dollar amount that we had to put in front of council. So the rush really was CJTC saying, okay, here's your money. You've reached a deadline. You've got 2 weeks. And again, with it being earmarked until it's actually locked down and we have contract with them. So that's really what kind of spurred that to bring it forward. Really before we were ready to bring it forward. It was something where we had to bring it forward. We'd done all the work, but in terms of coming forward, talk with the council about what this was, it had to be, we had 2 weeks, and we started looking at when we could get it on and actually make sure we hit our work session and business session. So
no, that's great. Yeah. I always like the perfect not being the enemy of the good enough. So like, I appreciate the expediency and the stress you guys were under just to get this out. In future grant rounds, are there further opportunities for the city to apply, or does each city get one shot?
Great question. So they have the final grant ends, final application deadline, they've done this in 3 phases. So the final one ends on August 15th, so end of this week. So, yeah. And what they've said is they've got a backlog of applications they're reviewing. I was just on their website earlier today. They said they will continue to review the applications in the queue in which they came, or in the order in which they came into the queue. And they're just, again, working through. When this started, it was a slow trickle, and everybody thought this was not going to be worth getting into. And like I said, as it came out that CJTC's interpretation, and again, as the administrator, they had actually had broad discretion to kind of open this up. When you started to look, it said may include. Words like that are pretty powerful when you start looking at law. So rather than shalls, it was a lot of mays, up to, not including, or not limited to. All those things started to come to bear where CJTC really opened this up because they weren't getting the applications. And so what there has been is a flood towards the end here of, again, King County was awarded, I want to say $12 million. Snow County just put in for $12 million. I want to say Pierce County got $8 million. So it is starting to get consumed now, and for a city of our size, the $2.5 million is a pretty impressive grab for an agency of our size. So, and I think that again is credit to getting our stuff done early because we had the support of council to move forward and the guidance. So it allows us to be one of the first at the table. So
Okay, great. And I'm going to open up to the rest of the council. I've got a couple more follow-up questions, but just want to make sure everyone gets a chance.
Councilmember Parshall, did you have some more? Because you were having that. Okay, go for it.
Thank you, Mayor. I do want to really commend this list, Chief. I didn't know what to expect going in, and I thought it was a really well-rounded list. I had a meeting with the mayor a couple weeks ago, and I said I was just really impressed with how well-rounded the list was that the police gave to us, because you're hitting multiple categories here. I think anytime like some grant funding is available, there's maybe a tendency to well, let's just put all of this grant money towards police officers and police safety, but you were looking out for other people on this list. You're looking out for the safety and health of our citizens, the safety and health of our jail inmates, and then also the safety and health of our officers, which is important as well. So I salute you for hitting a number of markers on that and not just making this all about the police officers. I also see a lot of good efficiency and financial benefit in the list that you suggested. We talk all the time about finances and the police department being stretched, and so if we can find tools that make you more efficient, make people's jobs easier, like you were talking about earlier, if somebody has to sit down at a computer or whatever and enter reports, that's time taken away from another job they can be doing. So those sort of things are included in this list as well. I have a couple questions. I would say also, I'm not on the payroll Big Bicycle either, but I really like the bikes in this one. As somebody that's on that Sound Transit board, this is the model that they're using in King County, and to be looking at what they're doing successfully and replicate it here is a really great idea. At some point, we'll have 2 stations in Linwood, and what you see down south is officers actually taking their bikes onto the train, riding to the next station, getting off, and then they can pedal around again. So someday there will be Linwood police officers pedaling at the mall and at Linwood City Center, and they'll be riding the train between those things. And maybe if annexation works out, they'll be riding up to 164th and the Ashway station as well. I had a couple questions on the finance. So we are being careful with the finance lens. So on the grant side, is there anything that you think is in this grant list that could be an ongoing cost 2 years down the line? I feel like you insulated yourself fairly well, but I'd love to hear you address the question of could anything here present a big ongoing cost?
Absolutely. So again, to Council Vice President's point earlier, the radars, if we were to bring those, once the grant expires, we'd be looking at about a $50,000 per year, because it's $1,000 per line. And we have an ability to tailor that. We've already spoken with the company, and they said we could just turn off service to some of the heads if you wanted. So we could reduce it down. We could have high-risk cells, low-risk cells, however we want to put it. But again, that risk mitigation grant that WCIA has already provided to us one time, we feel confident that we could bring that back to bear. But again, let's say that didn't happen, then we'd have a decision that we as a council, the council could come together, and as we discussed during our next budget, what this looks like and what makes sense. It might be that the technology is the camera technology is just starting to come on board. We're just not comfortable with it. This radar is a little more proven of a technology. But they're starting to use cameras right now, and the cameras are so sensitive, especially the higher resolution cameras, that they use an AI. They can actually pick up on the respirations, the rise and fall of the chest. So it might be that there's a cheaper, more streamlined option down the road. So potentially with that, yes. Drone as first responder would be another thing where we would have to make a decision of, is this a good program? Does this fit the needs of the city? Have we enjoyed our pilot and really figured out that this is value added? What I will have is data at that point where we can make a decision. So that will allow us to have the data. So this allows us to dive into this rather than me just coming forward and going, hey, I got this really cool idea, helicopters. I'm coming to you and saying, let's try this out. Let's see what this looks like. And again, we're still, I'm not presenting on that today or asking for anything on that, but there's some pretty neat technology, and there's going to be some pretty neat demonstrations being done by our 911 dispatch center in the coming month in September. And I'd like to invite all of you up there to see that, witness it, so you can kind of understand. They're going to be partnering with the fire department and with Snohomish County Sheriffs to kind of show what this technology can look like. I'll have a date for you. I don't have it yet, but it's actually set up for you to be able to go into their center and look at it and understand the technology better and hopefully see what value it could bring. So that's another thing that carries a risk. And then, like I said, the social worker position and the corrections officer, we would have decision points we'd have to make. I could use more jail staff. I can tell you that. Like I will be asking for more jail staff, not this budget, but at some point down the road, we need more jail staff. Our model is showing with the vacancy factors that we are experiencing with sick time, vacation, FMLA, PFML, the mandatory training they have to attend. 5 on the floor is never 5 on the floor. It's one missing for whatever reason. And again, I have to fill those spots. So I have mandatory minimums that we have agreed upon with our labor groups to make sure that we have good safety and also good manageable workloads. And so with that, that would be a discussion to be had. But I mean, just sneak peek, not this budget, but I will be asking for more staff for our jail at some point down the road. And looking for opportunities. There might be other grant opportunities. The Healthcare Authority, we have, through the 1115 waiver, of which we are a participant, there might be some funding there as well, as long as we can tie it back to reentry work. So yes, potentially, but we also have the ability to just absorb that back in. If we find ourselves in a worse position financially as a city 2 years from now, and we just have to absorb that back in, and we don't backfill that 28th position, because we do have people leave. We have people that retire, people that move to different areas. This year I think we've lost 4 custody officers. It's something that happens, and we plan on that. So yes, there's a potential, but we really are trying to plan these out so that it's a soft landing, and all of this stuff right here, there's nothing where we are tied to it at the hip where we're on the hook. We're not getting married to any of this. We have an ability to break up. So.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah.
A follow-up question was on the tech side with the radar and the drones as first responder, if we decide we can't afford that, we can step away from those ongoing costs.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, we're not. Okay. Yeah, there's not like a 5-year contract.
Right. Okay. That's what I want to make clear.
Sorry.
No, that was a follow-up question I had in response to what you said about those things. And then also, I'm curious, because I'm always curious about our ability to hire officers and attract officers to Lynnwood. Some of the things that you have in here, would you say it enhances the culture of Lynnwood for officers? I think when you're doing health screening for our officers, does that word get out there like, hey, Lynnwood cares for their officers. They're putting them through free health screenings. Is that something that makes us a more attractive destination for?
I sure hope so. I think it does. I mean, we had an officer who left for another agency recently, and he ended up coming back to Lynnwood because he liked the program that we're running here. He went down to another bigger agency, lots of great promises, and came back within about 6 months. So that's anecdote. It's not data, but it's something that we look at and go, maybe we are doing something right. So when we also have people leave, say Lynnwood's not my taste, and that's okay. But while people are here, we want them to feel valued. We want them to know that we care about them, and we recognize that they have a tough job to do. And so we're going to do whatever we can to support them. But I do think that. And so, yeah.
And it's just another thing I like about this is I know we're never going to be able to offer salaries at the highest upper echelons of the bigger. So if we can do some of those side things that make Lynnwood a more attractive place, that's fantastic. Thank you, Chief.
All right, let's go with Council Vice President.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple things.
Yes.
Is there any way that you can email us all a copy of the slideshow because it wasn't in the agenda packet?
Yep.
One. And then two, I understand you guys were super rushed and you had, but I do remember, I think part of one of the requirements was that you did get the committee involved and they had to do some kind of training or whatnot. I guess my question to you is, and the community, can we, when you send the email also, the slideshow, can we get a list of who all is in the Chiefs Committee?
Sure.
Because if I'm not aware as a council member, I don't know that the community is
Right.
aware.
Right.
And it would just be good to know, do we have,
Sure.
how do you introduce new members? Do you just, is it on a volunteer basis? Do you have a regular person? Does someone just be like,
Right.
I'm done and bring it in? If you can give us a
Yeah.
little background information on
Sure.
just kind of how
First
you
of
go
all,
about
not
that.
a committee, it's Chiefs Advisory Group. So it's a group that's selected by the chief. A little different. Committee, as you know, carries a different meaning and there are different requirements. So these are people that were chosen by me when I became chief. We had it under Tom Davis years ago. I have Wally Webster, Elizabeth Voles, Yoon Hong, Fong Win, Hector Garfias Toledo. I'm blanking.
I'm forgetting one too.
I'll get you the list of who's on there.
She's
So
been around recently.
yeah.
I think it would just be cool.
Oh, Lisa Ugalde Soros.
One, we just brought this to light to the
Yeah.
community this year so that they even know that you have one and
Right.
that you actually have a soundboard that's not
Yeah.
just police guys. And so I think that's good. And
Right.
just to kind of be even more transparent, let's just let them know who it is. That,
Sure,
you know.
absolutely. Yeah.
And then my other thing, because you've clearly gone through the House bill enough to where you kind of actually know some of the language and the mays and the shalls. I went as far as downloading it because in the last few weeks we've had thousands of pages thrown at us between the critical ordinance and the wastewater stuff, and then I started to dive into the Vision Zero and our other plans. But the curiosity and the reason why I downloaded it, but I have a sneaky suspicion you've already done it, is that they mentioned the word supplanting. And I'm curious, is there any wiggle room in there or any kind of lobbying for further uses that could help cities? Because we're not the only city in a financial crisis, and you guys have your needs, and they're not going away, and cities are only growing. They seem to have changed some language, and I don't know how it was done,
Yeah.
or I don't care, we got money. But I'm just curious about the supplanting, and if you have found where we can maybe, there's some gray.
Yes.
And if not, I'm not giving you.
That was one thing they were pretty clear on. This had to be extras, and that's kind of what made the grant again kind of difficult. I mean, you're sitting there trying to think of things of like, well, we could really use some help with overtime funding of just the existing overtime. There's lots of other things we could use the funding, and they're like, no, it needs to be the extras. It needs to be, and that's where even the training, the fact that they would take care of this training, that was a bit of a stretch for them because technically we have to budget for that. Anyway, there's state mandates, so it's kind of the unfunded mandates. But they did have a carve out in the law for training for the unfunded, for those kind of
So you
mandates.
did, which is why
That-
some
yes,
stuff
so
got
for the
added,
train-
which is,
yes.
was my suspicion
Yeah.
that we did kind of, well,
Yeah.
how about this and how about that? Because
And
then
they-
there was social workers
And they went for it. So
and there
yes.
was training. And
Yeah.
so clearly you guys put thought into it because there was more things than labor, which
Yes.
is good because the things, we can't have our things
Right.
anymore. But I had to ask,
No,
did we dig into the letter of the law, that typewriter language? And
like you said,
find
the
any
law
holes?
was not a great guide because we looked at that like, okay, that doesn't work, and then we'd find out another agency or the state would call us, and during a phone conversation would say, actually, yeah, okay, go ahead. And so we were it was kind of probing and like, is this okay? Is this not? And this is all happening in a time compressed fashion, and so it was clunky. I can tell you that this wasn't how we normally do it. But we saw an opportunity, and it was a matter of having to move forward on it. So these were call everybody into a room. Let's come up with some ideas that are furthering our public safety needs that are not supplanting, with the exception of the training that we are mandated to provide that, and they actually bought off on that. We were the law seems to allow for that. It allows for funding of the overtime backfill for mandated trainings.
What if a council decides not to fund a position because they don't have money? Can you then activate your grant and be like, we need this, it's a safety thing, but the legislative body has been like, figure it out? Is that a possible lever?
Great
maybe?
question. I don't know. I mean, they have us sign a contract. It's the mayor's signature on there, not mine, so I'm really comfortable. And no, I'm joking. I do think I think there are some things we'd really have to look at there, and have to have open dialogue with the state on that as we go forward. But we have time now that we have it earmarked in. We do have time to have those discussions.
Yeah, I know. I definitely had to ask that because there was an internal dialogue. Was like, have we, any of us, read it word for word and see like maybe there's something else that But of course, I appreciate that you guys did it, and then you brought in the committee, and that's where you came up with your list or the crew, whatever.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's all I had. They were just last kind of thoughts on the supplanting, and if we've,
Yes.
no possible stone left unturned. Thank you.
We explored it, but frankly, with how wide of discretion CJTC now has, there might be opportunities down the road, especially if this were to continue on. So thank you.
So we have some repeaters, so just want to make sure Councilmember Owens or Councilmember Wright have an opportunity. Good? Okay, Councilmember Wright.
I don't have any questions, just more comments. I do appreciate the context that you brought to this, because when we originally got the presentation a few weeks back, there was a lot of misinformation from the community. Just didn't understand what the grant was, and a lot of communication and dialogue that it's city money that it's coming from. So I do appreciate you going through and giving the why of why you applied for certain things. I wanted to echo what Council Vice President said, that I'm hopeful that when it does come up, that you're looking at your finances intentionally, conservatively. We've gotten in trouble before with over projecting about things that we may have down the line, and we don't, and now we're in a hole.
Yes.
And we don't want to see that again. So not necessarily a question, but I know that the folks over this will look at it with intention and clear eyes, and I'm hopeful for that. So, and good work on your team for this, because grants are not fun and they're quick.
Yes.
And if you don't take it, you lose it. So, good work on that.
Thank you. And we will and continue. We do take it seriously to be financially responsible with taxpayers' money, and it's built into what we're doing. So I appreciate that. We do take it seriously. So.
Councilmember Lutweiler.
Well, first, Councilmember Partial had reminded me of with the resources that you're making available for cardiac, health and everything. I imagine it's similar to the military with the police, that there's a stigma to take advantage of a lot of the resources that people need, and even if it's kind of technically available, can you get the time off, or is it just one of those things that we say it's there, but
Right.
there's not a climate or culture supporting it. So I did want to just state I think it's commendable to be taking those steps, and I recognize the damage that can happen when the leadership doesn't really support that, and people see right through that. Whether this is an authentic thing that my leadership wants me to do, or is this just kind of a check the box that they've told me, hey, that XYZ is available. So thank you for fostering that. My question was, maybe it might be too early to really know this answer, but we talked a little bit about this in the Finance Committee with the radar system and maybe some of the other systems and other parts of this grant. We at least kind of brainstormed maybe this could lead to lower insurance rates, or at least be a factor that gets considered. So I don't know if we are far enough along to have any sense of that's happening, or maybe it's just a comment of keeping it on our radar, maybe with the jail caucus idea that the mayor's leading, just some of these things that maybe beyond just the health and safety and immediate cost savings that we're hoping to see, there might be some longer term cost savings potentially if we can get this in front of the right people to show here's what we're doing that could lead to better outcomes, and therefore don't raise our liability insurance any more than it already has.
Well, Mayor's brought together a really good group for this jail caucus, and they have electeds at the table from the state, and they're having these very conversations about what they can do to mitigate it. Right now, as it stands, WCA is more likely than not that what you're going to get are these risk mitigation grants like we got with the wearables. So, but that'll be a discussion to be had with them, because I think that's going to be a pretty compelling case when we start talking about what we're doing in that facility, including having the 24/7 medical. So I would hope at some point there would be a recognition on their part of the work we're doing, but I look forward to that discussion. So, yeah.
All right, Council President.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the rest of the council for some great questions and commentary tonight. I think this was a discussion that was long awaited. I want to drill down into the tax itself. We've had comments from a couple of my colleagues about concern, because one of the reasons they voted this in the first place was because there was a discussion, and in fact, I guess it's in the ordinance itself, that we would be creating a special fund that would allow us to kind of curtail uses of these monies to things that maybe we're not comfortable with.
Sure.
We understand that we're kind of in a fiscal situation.
Yeah.
We're in a situationship with the budget. And there's not a whole lot of flexibility right now. But moving forward at some point, can you elaborate a little bit on what restrictions are built in right now into these funds? What restrictions we could reasonably consider in the future? I think that will just help us kind of drive
Sure.
that conversation in a productive way.
Yeah, I know for the remainder of this year, I mean, broadly it can be used for the criminal justice purposes. I mean, the public safety sales tax is very broad. And I know when we talked as a group, one of the things that was forcing us, or not forcing us, that we made the decision collectively to move forward as quick as we could, was really to garner as much funding as we possibly could for this year to cover some of the shortfalls. That money, while it goes into a bucket right now of Fund 105, which is a criminal justice fund, it is a bucket that is part of the overall city bucket. So as needs happen, that's where I'm working with the assistant city administrator on that. In terms of what we're looking at, we do have a plan in place. I'm still working on this with the mayor and with the assistant city administrator. I know during our budget presentation, I'll have a white paper for them that will speak very clearly to what exactly is being funded and how it's being funded, so it's clearly earmarked for council and for transparency to everybody. So that plan is in place. I don't have the white paper or documentation, and that's something where, again, we're still working on what that exactly looks like, but I'll have it ready within a couple weeks, and after council break, it will be available and clear to everybody.
I think that'd be fabulous to send to the whole council, and just kind of the whole conversation here is really about enhancing the transparency of what's going on in our police department with the community as we request more funding from the public.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I appreciate this. Just to circle back, though, if we do discuss additional restrictions on the use of the funding as a council, what is counterproductive? Like, what level of restrictions are at a certain point counterproductive? If we want to angle it towards the behavioral health aspect, I think that's within the scope. Is that too restrictive 2 or 3 years down the line?
Could I also have ACA Harold be part of the conversation? Because this is really what we're talking about right now. Thanks.
Hello. So it's a good question. So the funding around the public safety sales tax is a lot broader, primarily because most local jurisdictions, the majority of the work that they do is public safety. And so it was in one of the slides, in one of the pages of the slides, but the public safety sales tax can pay for everything that is broadly public safety related. So it can pay for domestic violence intervention. It can pay for indigent defense services. It can pay for our prosecuting attorney services. Thank you. Reentry work for inmates. It can pay for substance abuse intervention. It can pay for reducing homelessness or behavioral health. So a lot of cities will have put the funds from the public safety sales tax, because it's the majority of most cities, they will have put it in the general fund. It was when it was passed by Linwood, the request to put it in a special fund. So instead of that funding going to the general fund where most of our public safety comes from, it was requested to be put into a specific fund, and so that fund was 105, which we are currently using. If we are funding general fund related ongoing services from 105, if we begin to do that in the future, we are going to want to then consider what financial parameters we put around Fund 105. Because if we've used it for grant matching and all of those other things, we look in the fund, we say there's this grant, there's a matching component, we look in 105, there's funds, and you're like, great, we're going to go pursue that grant. If we start putting something like, for example, a number of officers in 105, then we have to have the financial parameters to sustain that in 105 instead of having the parameters to sustain that in the general fund. In the general fund, our parameters are things like having, a certain amount of reserves. So if the sales tax, if something happens and there's a dip in the economy, we have some insulation from protecting people's paychecks, for example. We don't currently have those parameters on Fund 105, and so if we start loading some of our more ongoing expenses into 105, then we're going to have to think about what parameters we then put on that fund in order to ensure that we are not jeopardizing ongoing city functions with a separate fund that the council's not looking at on a regular basis.
Okay, what I'm kind of hearing is maybe this would be a good conversation to circle back to maybe in Q1 or Q2 of next year after we kind of get a handle on what's going on. We've gotten through the property tax situation, all that, and kind of have an idea of what our budget is materially. That's what I'm hearing, and that's what I'm going to propose at the moment. I just wanted to close on probably some of the lesser thought about or commented about aspects of this whole thing we've done. And that's, first of all, just to apply for the sales tax and get it, it required the police department to basically adopt a bunch of best practices. And that only benefits the community. So once again, just echoing everything my colleagues have said, I think the police department really should be commended for the tremendous amount of work to meet these bars that were put in front of you. And then for us to also acknowledge that the grant opportunities here, in a way, allow us to explore efficiencies through investments that we haven't been able to do before. In the same way that our Public Works Department invested in a mini paver and have found it to be quite useful for reducing the cost of doing some really basic infrastructure projects in the city, we may find the same benefits from the Drone as a First Responder program. And I'm really interested in finding out what kind of levels of service it allows us to do with how much less money. We already got kind of burned with flock cameras, thinking along those same lines. This feels like doing that without all of the bad stuff. So, I'm really interested in seeing what kind of data we get out of this, and I'll be paying attention closely. Thank you.
Council Vice President.
As much as I wanted to get out of here too, most of my questions and comments were focused on the updates of the grant because that was a fast 0 to 60. Switching gears to the sales tax, and I didn't speak to her in between meetings because I really never do to anybody, but I have to do Councilperson Mata. I'm just hearing her in my head when this got passed, and ACA, you weren't here, so. The reason that we put it in a special fund is because we did not want it to go into 105 to just get added to more of the police department budget. This specific safety sales tax, we actually wanted to have councilmatic approval, or at least a say, maybe a proposal back and forth, a work session. So the intent was never to put it in 105, which is why the ordinance speaks as it does. And there's so many more uses that I'd be better putting it in the general fund, but it was our understanding that we couldn't do that either because it could only be used for certain things and it might muddy the water and you would need to track it and if it got audited and whatnot. I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of background to that because quite honestly, some of us didn't want a vote on it. And we were excited to actually have something that, hey, people were taxing you, but we could tell them exactly what it's for. Before all these previous taxes, it's just like, because we needed it because we didn't pay for the things back then. With this money, we really wanted to do our community a solid and be able to do that transparency line. And so I just wanted to give you a little bit of context of why we went in that direction and what the hope was. And I still hope to see that. I would like for it to be a coordinated, collaborated effort on this newer sales tax. And for the community in the memo, there's in May 2026, $2,372.94 collected from the sales tax. In June, $260,350.33, and that was the full month. July, $281,484.51, and so we're just kind of starting to see it trickle in. And so I liked seeing these numbers, and I thought this is good so we can start thinking about how we're going to use it if it continues to trend in this way, so that we could be fiscally responsible with this specific sales tax and the fund. That's really kind of what I wanted to add and say with regards to this specific, the sales tax versus the grant.
So, and of course, I wasn't here yet, but so I do know that the tax is being collected in 105. And if there is a different direction, that's something that we can discuss during the budget cycle. I mean, looking at all of the funds is part of the budget book. And what's funded and how it's funded, that is the purview of council. So it will be brought forward as part of the budget, and so it's a great place to have a conversation about it.
And clearly we're at your technical expertise to tell us, you know, within the social and the police side of things. You know, it's not like we're going to go and come up with a proposal for the safety sales tax that came in, but we would like to, I think, you know, have a feel for what these funds are going to be earmarked for, especially now that we have these two different distinct pockets of money. We're going to have this big bucket of grant for all the things and the social worker. And so now we can kind of, hey, with what's trickling here, and be conservative and show the people exactly what we're doing. Thank you.
All right. Anything else? Very good. We're going to move on then. Thank you very much.